Yo, everybody, what's up? Welcome to the Keeneland Kickoff Show. I'm excited to have two guests on top of Eddie C. We got the sniper, Barry Spoears. How you doing, Barry?
Good. How you doing, man?
Good, good, good. And we've also got who I've heard is the mayor of Saratoga.
He's the
Mist-
assistant mayor.
He's the assistant mayor,
Yeah.
Mr.
Who's
Chuck
wait?
Simon.
Well, hold on. Who's the real mayor? Because it ain't me. Is it you?
No,
Not me.
the real mayor is Spears.
Dave Spears, my brother.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's really my brother too.
he is.
Well, how come
We
I
spell
haven't
the
met him
names
yet?
differently, but we're still brothers.
Well, look. I mean, Barry. One thing I will always say is you're my brother from another mother.
That's
so,
right.
I mean,
That's right.
so look. Let's kick this off this way. Let's talk about Saratoga. Let's talk about this meet. I mean, we were blessed with fantastic weather for most of the meet. It was great seeing both you and, or actually all three of you. I mean, here's the great thing about Twitter is I would not know Chris or you, Barry, without Twitter. And I actually got to meet Chuck at Gulfstream when he was still a trainer. But Chuck, I want you to kick this off. Talk about your upbringing at Saratoga, your family history there, and being a trainer and running horses at Saratoga, and what Saratoga means to you.
Saratoga's home for me. I've said this a lot of times that when you grow up in Saratoga, and I went to Saratoga Catholic right there on Broadway, you either love horse racing or you hate horse racing. It's either an intrusion in your life or it's something that you look forward to. And obviously, I chose one side. But I started working for trainers when I was about 14. I worked at the harness track. I used to sneak in the backside. And the first guy to actually give me a job that wasn't just kind of, running errands and stuff was Cherie DeVoe's dad.
Wow.
I worked for him for 2 summers. And it's kind of funny how things come full circle as she wound up going to work for me years later. But I mean, it's just, you grow up in Saratoga, and it's when you're a kid, you don't realize that not everybody has a world-class track in their backyard.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I grew up in Maryland, and I loved the whole Jim McKay horse racing part of Laurel, Pimlico, and things like that really hits home to me. But do you have a story about the Whitney family or a specific family, maybe even the Yaddo family, about Saratoga that you could share with the people?
To be honest, like, people from Saratoga don't pay any attention to those type of people. We don't care about them. They're just for the outsiders. They're just rich people that come into town once in a while. I mean, I'll be honest, that is the truth.
Chuck, I wanted to ask you a question about you went to I don't know the high schools up there, but you actually went to the Saratoga High School where everybody goes to up at that neck of the woods, right?
Well, there's 2 high schools in Saratoga. Saratoga High, which is the public school, and I went to the Catholic school, believe it or not, Saratoga Catholic.
So when you at Saratoga Catholic, because I'm going to tell you that I went to high school in Maine, and there's probably a joke behind that. But when I get thinking about it, I hated math. Now my question is, when they did math class in Saratoga, did they incorporate some part of horse racing into that?
No.
No. Oh, that's disappointing.
The only thing horse racing related that was in our school was the racing forms that we'd sneak in to look at instead of paying attention to what we were actually supposed to be doing.
Oh, I guess my fantasy's busted. I always thought if you went to high school in Saratoga, all they talked about was horse racing all day long.
No, unfortunately, that's a myth. But we'll go with it if you want to.
You grew up in Saratoga and everything. How did you get into training? And maybe touch on one or two of your favorite horses that you trained, or one or two of your best horses that you trained. And maybe even talk about your relationship with Stella Fair, which you shared with me, which I believe is a special relationship.
Well, I got into I got into horse racing because my dad told me to get a job when I was 14 or 15. And I said, I'm too young to work. And of course, he comes back with a job for me the next day. And it was at a farm called Saratoga Standardbreds, which was where Niatros wound up standing. Who's Niatros, one of the all-time, most famous, kind of like the secretary of harness.
Right.
So the job I had there, when I got there, I thought I was going to work at a horse farm. So I was kind of pumped up about that. And I got there and they gave me a wheelbarrow and a pickaxe, and they told me to go pick up rocks from a field. So after one day, I quit that job, and I told my dad, I said, this is more like prison than it is a job. Like hard labor can't be worse than this. So a friend of mine, a little degenerate friend, told me to go to the track, the harness track. They're always looking for people out to hire. So I drove my moped over there and snuck in through the maintenance gate and just wandered around till somebody said, "Hey, what are you doing? You want to, do you want to work?" So that's kind of how it started. Yeah, and when I was young, so Naira always was a little more strict about like state laws and stuff. So I couldn't get in there until I was 16 with working papers. And even then, the meet was short back then, and there wasn't much off-season training. I did wind up working for a couple trainers on the thoroughbred side at the Oklahoma track, but you're talking about the 80s, and the horses that stabled at Saratoga off-season in the 80s were the bottom of the barrel horses that couldn't get stalls at Belmont and Aqueduct. No one wanted to stable at Saratoga off season. So you're talking about really cheap horses. It's completely opposite now. Now it's all the best horses are there. So just things came worked out, and I wound up going to play basketball for 2 years, and then after I've kind of figured out that the NBA wasn't calling, I transferred to the University of Arizona, and they had a racetrack industry program. So, that was like ready made for me. A lot of the stuff was a lot of the content was stuff I already knew. So I did really well there. And after my second year, I got an internship I did at Yonkers Raceway, which is a standardbred track, through a trainer that had met me when I was 15 years old at Saratoga. And they set me up there, and they wound up offering me a job right out of college as assistant racing secretary. So I got a job at Yonkers, which is back then a major standardbred track, as assistant racing secretary, and I was 20. So that just doesn't happen very often. Most people start way, way, way down the bottom of the totem pole, and I started pretty high. So I did that for a couple of years, and I just didn't really. I liked it, but it was. We were racing a tremendous amount back then. We were racing in the summertime 7 days a week, and we'd run 2 cards on Tuesday in the afternoon and at night, and it was just kind of, you could see where you could easily get burned out doing that. And I really wanted to work with the horses again, and I quit, and I went over to Belmont, and I got a job working for Wayne Lucas. His assistant was a guy named, you might know him, Todd Bletcher, who I'd gone to school with at Arizona. And Todd, gave me the okay. And Jeff was in charge then, Jeff Lucas. This was at Belmont. George Weaver was the foreman. Dallas Stewart was the assistant in Kentucky. Mark Henning had just gone on his own not that long ago. Kieran had been the assistant out in California. He had just gotten Chris Antley's book. So it was kind of interesting looking back now, but I worked there for a couple of years, and then I figured, what Wayne was doing was kind of hard to emulate, and especially back then in the 90s. And I said, I really need to get a better, a a wider variety of training methods to look at. So I wound up working for a guy named Pete Ferriola, who was a top claiming trainer in New York. I mean, for a couple of years, he was the leading trainer in New York. He won so much. I worked for him for a while at Aqueduct. I worked for a guy named Tom Skiffington for a couple of years, and he really was the precursor to Chris Clement and Chad Brown, guys that are primarily turf trainers. Skiffington was that before anyone else was doing that. And I also wound up working for Nick Zito for a spring, and Nick was completely focused on the Triple Crown at that time. He didn't care about fillies, he didn't care about turf horses, he just wanted Triple Crown horses, which he did. Him and Lucas did really, really well during the 90s. When you go back and look, they had a huge amount of success during that decade.
Sure.
And then a job opened up with Alan Jerkins, and that was something that just didn't happen very often. Jobs didn't open up because that was the best place on the track to work. And
and not to interrupt, but did Alan Jerkins, was that kind of like your lead-in? That was your big break?
Well, I don't know that I would say it was my big break, but it was an opportunity that didn't really present itself already. I mean, I had 2 college degrees, and I'd already worked for a bunch of different trainers. So I had a pretty good resume, but Alan Jerkins was kind of like the master's degree, And after about 2 days, I could see that it was just going to be way different than anything else. And I worked for him for about 6 years. The first year Jimmy was there, he was assistant, and then he went on his own after about a year and a half. So then I was the head assistant for Alan for those remaining years, and it was a great education. You think you know a lot about horses until you talk to Alan Jerkins, and then he'll bring up like 3 different points that you never considered, and you say to yourself, "Man, I don't know anything." But that was a great opportunity for me, and it was a life-changing experience, because the things that he taught me are things that you use every day in life, not just in horse racing. But I got an opportunity to train for Mr. Ramsey. An agent of his came and asked me if I was interested in interviewing for the job, and I did, and I got the job, and I did it for 20 years. So.
No, I mean that's an awesome story, and I could literally talk to you about this for hours. But
Hey,
Barry,
Chuck, I just wanted to ask one thing. Like Barry's off screen, but I wanted to ask Chuck, Todd Pletcher. I didn't realize that you worked for him. You said?
Well, no, he worked for Wayne Lucas at the same time as I did. He only worked there for about another year after that, and then he went on his own, started his stable. I think 1995 was the first year Todd started.
Does Todd Pletcher ever let his hair down? Like, does he just go wild sometimes? Because he seems like he's very even keel.
Todd's a funny guy. He doesn't show it often, but he's pretty sharp, and he's let's just say his persona is what he wants it to be.
talk to me about, or talk to us about your getting in with TVG, with Tampa. I mean, I have so many questions I want to ask you, but let's start there.
Well, I mean, it kind of just happened, it wasn't anything that I did in particular, or, just networking, being on Twitter, talking to people, meeting people at the track, and just kind of being around. And I guess somebody somewhere saw something or noticed something that I was okay at, and they were like, hey, you want to give this a try? And I was like, sure. And we had worked on it, me and myself and Ken Rudolph were talking back and forth about it, because he definitely wanted to get me involved in a bigger sense. And, he really wasn't sure how far I was willing to kind of go with it. And I told him I was open wanted to kind of do a bit more, and he kind of pulled some strings and got me on there. Same thing with the Tampa situation. Good friend of the family and Going in Circles podcast, and everybody is Sid Fernando, and Chuck even did some bidding for me in order to kind of get that opportunity. So, I'm just grateful all the way around to be able to say I did some things within this sport that I love a lot.
Hurricane Ian just came through. I saw some of the devastation behind it. You experienced it a lot more than I did. Tell us about how you're doing, how your family's doing, your neighborhood, and what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't even begin to tell you how blessed we were in this whole situation. Like, my neighborhood was pretty beat up. They got hit hard. Fortunately for us, our house wasn't really damaged. We had a couple of trees fall on it. Palm fronds and stuff blown around the backyard. But other than losing power for 4 days, we really came out unscathed. So for us, it was just kind of an inconvenience. But I know for other people, especially those on the west coast of Florida, it was devastating. Like, Fort Myers is basically gone. So I spent a lot of time in Fort Myers when I was playing in the USBL. And, just to imagine that all gone is just crazy to me.
What I saw was, it was total devastation. I've never seen anything like that. It's, and my heart, prayers, and everything go out to that. But now let me take it to a different level. When am I going to beat both you and Chuck in horse?
Never.
Oh, no, absolutely, bro. I'm going to beat you right-handed and left-handed. Come on now.
Dude, I'm telling you.
Let's ask a better question. Who would win in the game? Who would win in a basketball one-on-one, Chuck or Barry?
Barry.
Oh, I got Barry. I got Barry all day long. Come on now.
Hey, 30 years ago, I could have made it close. Now, after about 3 points, I would just concede.
Oh,
Chuck,
no, I wouldn't count you out. I'm
really I would.
Hopeful as I could be, but I can still shoot.
Chuck,
Right,
were you a point guard or a small forward? I got to ask.
I played all positions, my friend. All positions.
Chuck, hold on. Chuck was a heavy set center.
Chuck was not
get right to the root.
Let me just tell you, in high school and college, Chuck was not heavy set. Chuck was about between 170 and 190.
All right,
which is about 100 pounds ago.
All right, so hold on, because I saw Barry say this on Twitter. That who were you kind of awestruck with? And I believe you kind of mentioned something about having dinner with Andy Serling. So
dinner. I didn't mention the dinner. He mentioned the dinner, but yes.
All right, but you were kind of awestruck, and so talk about the dinner. Talk about that whole experience.
Oh, it was great, man. I told Chuck when before I got up to Saratoga that I was going to have dinner with him, and that it was basically going to be like meeting Michael Jordan. I mean, any handicapper or analyst or horse player, at least for me, he's like the guy. I know growing up, I used to read the books of Andy Byers, Bidowitz, those kind of people. But they're kind of out of the spotlight. He's kind of the last guy standing, and somebody that I've always admired and respected his candor on all things handicapping and betting. So it was really cool. I mean, it's always weird when you meet somebody that you're kind of awestruck with, because you don't know how to act or how they're going to act. But, it was like we've been friends forever. So it was really cool experience to meet him for the first time in person. I've talked to him several times before, but we never met in person. We had dinner together, a couple drinks, and it was really cool.
Let me ask this question while he's frozen. How in the heck did you guys meet? Because you seem like you're contrasting personalities. You're two easygoing guys. How did you guys get connected here? How did you guys meet up?
I can't even remember, to be honest with you. It just happened. It was just one day we were friends. It was like, yeah, we're cool. Honestly, one thing
Am
about...
Am I back?
You're back.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing about Chuck is, and one of the things, this is one of the reasons why he's one of my best friends, is because he just basically adopted me, and everybody, that's in his circle adopted me and treated me like they've known me forever. And that's something that, I really value. I mean, I'm kind of a loner as it is anyway. So having him and his friends reach out and be cool with me was really, really cool.
That's cool.
One of the best things about it.
Chuck, same question. Like, what makes you guys click from a chemistry level on your show and everything?
We're not full of shit.
You know what, Chuck? That's actually the best answer you could have ever said, because it's true. You guys are just, good to the core people.
Barry and I kind of met on social media, and the more we talked, the more common people we knew, and the more common experiences through basketball and things like that. And we grew up kind of in the same era of racing that we all kind of miss now. And he's a good dude. So, and I'm not like a guy that's like, I have a million friends, but I don't have that many friends because, one of the things about being involved in racing is that in a lot of ways, you wind up moving all the time. If I could ever get a list of all the addresses that I've had over the last, 30 years, it's probably close to 30, because for a while when you're on the circuit, you go from Saratoga. I had horses at Belmont and Kentucky, and then I had horses at the fairgrounds and Gulfstream. I stabled a couple years in Chicago, so. You move a lot, and that's the thing is you don't get a chance to get, real close to people, because you're meeting a lot of new people, which is always great. But you're also wary in racing because we are competitive. One of the biggest misconceptions is that trainers are all buddies. That is not true. That is not true at all. And that doesn't mean that we don't have trainers that are friends. I have trainers to this day that I'm friends with, really good friends with, but it's a competitive business, and believe me, there's a lot of backstab and there's a lot of stuff going on. And the truth of the matter, and this is something that people on Twitter and social media say all the time, which is just not true, and that there's like some thin blue line, like for cops. Well, that's not true. If somebody knew what Peter Miller or one of those guys was using, they would turn him in. They would snitch on him in a second.
Let's talk a little bit about HISA and. You're literally one of the most...
You still want to be friends if we're going to talk about HISA?
Well, I think you are probably the most intelligent person I've met in horse racing.
Which doesn't say much for horse racing.
Well, talk to me about what we need to do with horse racing.
Listen, I was on Joey Bianca's podcast yesterday, and we talked about HISA a lot. And he said, well, you're not a HISA backer. I said, I'm not a nice HISA backer. That's not true. I just don't think that the way it's been rolled out or the focus that they've had is going to be beneficial for us. Some of the things, and Barry and I have talked about this on our show many times, that if we're going to standardize rules, let's standardize them, not change them. But the other thing is that from a handicapping standpoint and a better standpoint, and of course everyone else is involved too, the fact that they're not dealing with on-the-track incidents and standardizing the rules across the board for all the tracks on the track, which would seem to be the easiest thing to standardize, and it would also seem to be the most important thing, because what happens on the racetrack, it affects everyone. It affects the bettors, it affects the trainers and owners and jockeys, and it affects breeders, it affects everyone. And to see some of the incidents that we see, and to think that using the Rich Strike, Hot Rod Charlie kind of debacle as an example, that Heisa is way more concerned about Hot Rod Charlie's shoes than they are Sonny Leone committing a flagrant 2 foul, 50 feet from the wire. And which one would you say is a bigger safety issue?
You couldn't have put it any better than that, because I totally 1000% agree with you on that.
Yeah, so that's one of the problems I have with Heisa. And I mean, I really have a big problem with stealing the owner's money because the jockey hit the horse with the Nerf whip 10 times instead of 9 times. It just seems overly harsh. And to have articles written time and time and time again about a foal dropping foals. Well, a drop in foals is really a drop in owners. It's a supply and demand world. If the demand was there, and there is high demand for the better class horses, but we can't just operate with that. We can't just have good races, just like the NFL just can't have playoffs. You have to have a regular season, and that's one of the things that I think really is part of the problem. And part of the problem with Heisa, or a big part of the problem, is that you just don't have the proper experience on these boards. And they have very credentialed people. They have very smart people that are very good in their own worlds. But as for making rules for the racetrack itself, none of these people really operate in that world. And I use the analogy many times. I said, if you tried to tell me, I've watched football a million games. I played 1 year at high school, and I was so skinny back then, I quit after a year. But if you told me that I was on a board, or I was in charge of a panel that was going to change football rules, well, I would make sure that I brought in referees, and I brought in coaches, and I brought in players on both sides of the ball. I would bring in special teams guys, because the aspects of their their specialty is unique. I wouldn't ask a quarterback about kicking rules. And I think that that's something that Heisa just didn't do. They brought in people that are very credentialed to be on a board, but they didn't bring anyone in that can lead them. And that's really kind of, my expectations are low because of that. And I'm not saying.
Well, okay, but is that Heisa's is that Heisa's issue, or is that the industry issue?
No, it's Heisa's issue. Heisa didn't invite anybody to know what the hell they were doing.
Yeah, but the industry brought Heisa in, right? Because the industry can't regulate themselves.
A very small percentage of the industry. Did you have any say? Did any of us have any say?
No, not at all.
Exactly. Do you know anyone that did have a say?
No,
I don't either. So
exactly.
But the funny thing is that it's not even the government. It's government mandated, but the government doesn't care about it. I mean, they say a lot of times, they throw this in our face. Well, Congress. I said, Congress doesn't care about this, about Heisa. It was passed. On a bill that I'm sure no one who voted on that bill, yay or nay, paid one bit of attention to it. It was just it's a horse racing thing. They don't care about that.
The thing I would ask. So, I mean, listen, I don't know Barry, what typically, when you start looking at a card and you start handicapping, we might have lost Barry, but when we start handicapping, what are you looking for? Like, what are your go-tos? What are the first things you're looking at when you handicap a card?
The standard, pace, form, class, speed. Not in that order though, but the 4 big keys there. And it's such an organic process, and everybody has something different that they do and routines and how they actually get into the races. Myself personally, I don't spend an inordinate amount of time handicapping. I spend a lot more of my time creating bets and trying to maximize profit on what I'm doing. Because a lot of the times, at least for me,
Is that through replays?
I'm sorry?
Is that through replays, watching replays, or?
I do a little bit of replay work. I'll select a couple, especially if there's a replay that a lot of the horses have in common or they were all running together. But it's not like I'm sitting down hours and hours and hours just watching replays. I'll watch maybe a couple per race, depending on, if there were a trouble line or something that I wanted to see specifically. But beyond that, it's really, I guess in order, speed, pace, class, form, current form.
Okay. Chuck, I'll ask the same question. I'm sorry.
Each horse in every race, and it doesn't take me all that long. But, I spend a lot more time trying to construct bets than I do handicapping. So anything that can make any of that process easier, I'm all for it.
Yeah, Chuck, same thing. I mean, your experience as a trainer, what are you looking at when you go and handicap a race? Like, you dive into a race, dive into a card. What are you looking at?
The first thing I look at when I look at a race is I try to figure out how it's going to play out. Who's the main speed? Where are they breaking from? Is there any horses? Will there be a fast pace or a slow pace? How will that compromise horses? Are any horses compromised by post position? And then kind of go from there. I mean, and that might be maybe part of my standardbred background in effect, because you have to handicap a standardbred race completely different than a thoroughbred race. But I think there's elements that you can use, and that pace is a huge factor. To me, it's always been a factor that a lot of the horses will be compromised because of the pace, and there's nothing they can do about it. So that's the first thing I try to find out. Is there going to be a loose lead, or is there going to be a strong pace? And then trying to figure out who, how it all sets up. And then, you get into the technical aspects, the jockey changes or trainer changes or surface changes and things like that. But I mean, I watch video more than I used to, mostly because it's so accessible. And, I remember the old days we'd have to go and put the VHS tape in and rewind and flash forward. And now, you can do it with your finger, and you can go through races really, really fast. And I think that helps too, because and I don't look up every race, especially with the races that are kind of nothing. There's not really much to look at. But, sometimes a horse will get a trouble trip, and I want to check it out, because sometimes the form or the chart caller, he either doesn't one way or the other. He doesn't put enough emphasis on it, or he overdoes it, where you watch and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, it was barely anything. And these days it's harder and harder to find an edge in the handicapping side. And I think what Barry said is very true, in that you have to structure your wagers properly, because you're fighting against more smart people in the pools now than ever, especially with the computer guys who are just using, who really aren't even handicapping their races. They're just plugging the program in, and the programs aren't going to make a lot of mistakes. I mean, they'll make mistakes; they're not perfect, but you really have to fight and try to find stuff that everyone else doesn't see.
And I wanted to get into a little bit about Saratoga too. And I mean, obviously, Chuck, you got deep roots there, but
He's
Barry,
the mayor.
I know he's the mayor of Saratoga. He is the mayor of Saratoga. But Barry, this was your first trip to Saratoga this summer?
Me?
Yeah. Is this your first time?
Oh, I told you I used to live in Massachusetts.
I didn't know that you went over to Saratoga for Mass. That's a long ways.
Yeah. No, I've been there before, but I haven't been since 2009.
Okay,
that was the thing.
That
Florida in 2009 and hadn't been back. And in fact, the last race I saw before I went up there this year was the Rachel Alexandra's Woodward.
Rachel, that's what I was going
So
to say.
that was the last race I saw
Wow.
before going this year to see that god awful race where Vallelujah won and destroyed my pick 5 and my pick 4 all in one shot. So there's that.
You're killing me. So let's talk a little Keeneland. And I know, Chuck, you said you handicapped some stuff for Friday, and Barry, I think you said you handicapped a couple of races for Saturday. I mean, what are your thoughts on Keeneland? Because I have my own opinion on Keeneland. Like, I mean, where does it stand as far as your rotation of tracks? Where do you hold it up to? I'll start with you, Chuck.
I'm Keeneland. I'm a Keeneland guy. I like Keeneland. I like the fact that there's a good variety of horses coming from different places, and the fields are big. People want to run there. A lot of the, Lexington is the breeding capital of the world, and that's where a lot of the horse racing power is, and they like to see their horses run there. So, big fields, and there's a pretty good variety of races, and I really like the $3 turf try. What do they call it, Barry? The $3 turf.
I don't know. Let me look.
Pick 3 or whatever they call it. Whatever it is, it's a good bet. I really like it. It's a high minimum bet. It pays great. I don't hit it very often, but it's a good bet. And Keeneland gets away with doing it because they have big fields, and that really makes it a good bet.
Chuck, hey, Chuck. Sorry to interrupt, but Chuck, let me ask you a question. As a trainer, do you remember when there wasn't a track announcer there?
Yeah.
And you just heard the hoofs of the horses running? How
Yeah.
cool is that, right?
I can't tell you how many times that you weren't even you weren't paying attention. All of a sudden you looked up and they're halfway down the backside.
Exactly. But, I mean, how cool was that, right?
It was a little weird, to be honest with you. I mean, you couldn't do it nowadays, but
right.
it was different. But Keeneland's great. I mean, Keeneland's a fun time. There's a lot of people at the track most days, and it's they treat you well if you're a horseman. Not all the tracks do. But I know I had some good success at Keeneland. I think I was the 3rd leading trainer one year, back in 2004, 2005. 3rd or 4th. I was like 5 for 10 or 4 for 8 or something like that. But
Attaboy.
It's it's a cool place, and it's fun. It can be cold, especially in the fall, which is why the Breeders' Cup. Our friend Tony Montanino's got an extra ticket for the Breeders' Cup, and he's been begging me to go with him, and I really don't want to go, but I've been there when you've had those days of just bone chilling, because Keeneland's a stone facility. So there's not a lot of warmth in that place. And when you get those real cold, damp days, man. I was working for Nick Zito in the spring, and we ran into Lexington, Star Standard. And it was the most miserable cold day you could ever imagine. It was about 40 degrees, pouring rain. It was just above the freezing mark, and I don't think I've ever been as cold as I was that day. That was a really, really cold day.
Barry, same thing. I'm going to ask you the question. Is Keeneland one of your go-to tracks?
Absolutely.
What do you like about it?
And then some. And they call that pick 3 the Keeneland, the $3 Keeneland turf pick 3. That's the name of it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, especially opening weekend, maybe even the first 2 are really, really good, on both the fall and the spring. But definitely on my radar. The toughest challenge pretty much there is, other than like maybe Turfway. But yeah, it's definitely high on my list. I break out my Keeneland shirt every April and October for sure.
Do you have
hey, go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask, do you have a rotation, Barry, that you usually follow from track? Like, do you play one track? Are you just playing everything? I mean, what's it look like?
Chuck thinks I play everything.
I think I think he plays 24 hours a day.
No, you see, the thing with me is, and I say this to everybody, and they, I mean, usually don't believe me, but I watch so many races per week. It's unreal. TVG is on constant in my house. Would drive my wife nuts. I'm surprised she hasn't called for a divorce yet, because it's always on. And you know, I enjoy just watching it, even if I don't have any action or, you know, anything like that. But, you know, I learn a lot from watching races, and, you know, I'm always trying to get better at the craft, and, you know, seeing as many races as you can during the week, no matter if they're cheap $5,000 claimers or, you know, running in a $5 million race. There's always something to learn. So that's really my mantra with all that. But I typically stick to Gulfstream. I usually play Gulfstream the most. New York is probably behind that, and then Kentucky, and then California. And then if anything piques my interest, I'll take a look and see if there's any opportunity there to make money. And if there isn't, I'll just move on to the next one. There's so many races. I will play, especially on Friday nights, is usually like the potpourri, where I'll spread it around and try to do things that I don't normally do, like play Remington in Australia, for example. Charlestown on a Friday night is something that I like to do. And then there's always the allotment for the harness tracks, because I like playing harness, Meadowlands, and Woodbine Mohawk, or Mobine, as we call it.
We should change your name from the Sniper to No Days Off.
Yeah, that's probably a good.
And
like right now, like for instance, right now, my wife came home from work. The TV's on mute. It's on, and it's in the sight of my vision, and it's on TVG.
All right, let me ask you a question. I mean, are you going Australia 1, 2, 3, or what are you doing right now?
We go deep, especially if I'm winning. You know, have a couple of chiladas, and I'm sitting there playing at like 2 a.m.
You play Hong Kong?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay.
All right, no.
I played Hong Kong this morning.
Plus, how you got into TVG, Tampa. I mean, I love the fact that you're part of Tampa.
Well,
so talk to us about that.
I think, you know, as far as from where I'm sitting, there's not a lot of people of color in this industry, and it means a lot to me.
It means a lot to me too,
because the history of the game, there's a lot of history with African Americans or Black people in the sport that doesn't really always get recognized. And now with the faces of the industry, there's not many Black people there. There's only one. Honestly, Ken Rudolph is the only person that that is in that capacity as a Black man in this sport. And we have people like me kind of on the outside looking in, and I've been fortunate enough to get some opportunities. But, you know, we want to kind of put everybody on an equal plane and have more representation from the Black community in the sport, because you go to any racetrack and pretty much a third of the crowd is what you'll see are probably Black people. And I usually, you know, my gauge is Gulfstream. So you go to Gulfstream, you see a third Black people, you see a third of Hispanic, Latino people, and then third Black people. But the reflection of the media or the horse racing media and the faces of anybody in the industry doing handicapping or betting, you know, any kind of analyst, you don't see that kind of diversity. And I think that's where the industry could do a little bit better. And hopefully right I get the confidence to give more people like me a shot. And, you know, usually my mantra is at least in my head, and this is how I operate everything, I got to try to be at least 2 times better than everybody else. But it's just, you know, that's how I was taught when I was little. That's how my father taught me. That's how my mother taught me. And just to do.
And that's cool. And that's cool.
To succeed. So that's, you know, it's not really like a burden or anything like that. It's just how I operate. And, you know, hopefully it translates in things that I do, whether it's, you know, through tweets and what I talk about on Twitter or social media. And then hopefully it even comes through even more when I do the things that like Tampa or on TVG when I give picks or analysis. That's really what I want.
Well said,
Always.
Barry. I know that's a sensitive topic, but you said that very well. So I appreciate that. So I did want to just touch on you guys have your podcast. I was gonna play a little game here with Eddie since Eddie's on and he's on his
Let's
game.
go.
You ready to play a little game? All right.
Let's go.
This is the game. We all know we love horse race Twitter, right?
Yep.
This is how we've all met on horse race Twitter. Out of the three of you, because my horse race Twitter game is not where it needs to be, so it can't be the four of us. Out of the three of you, who do you think has the most followers?
Barry.
Eddie?
It's not even close. It's
Well,
Barry.
I'm just asking a question.
It's
Eddie?
not even close. It's Barry. It's Barry.
Okay. All right. So you're saying Barry? Barry, you voting for yourself too?
He's my brother from another mother, and I love
All right.
him, so.
I mean, I don't want to vote for myself, but
All right. Here's the second part of the
but
question.
it's true. But it's true.
yeah.
Here's the best part of the question. Who's got the most tweets?
Eddie.
Could it Eddie? You think it's Eddie?
Well, I made
Eddie's got the most
tweet.
drunk tweets.
I made a tweet. Wait, what's up with that? What's up with that? Come on now.
I don't really drink, and Barry, when he does, he doesn't usually tweet. So
No, I fall asleep.
Fact check. I'm doing a fact check right now. Charles Simon. I don't know how the hell you could have 50,000 tweets. Charles has 50,700 tweets. That's legendary right there, Chuck.
50 grand, 50, man. You call me 50.
50? Oh, I'm gonna
Nifty 50.
Barry. Barry
the way,
has. Well, wait a minute. Barry has 141,000 tweets.
You got me by
That
triple.
puts Barry in the Hall of Fame of tweeting, I think. Eddie C, do you have more or less than 141,000 tweets? That's the question.
I have to have less.
Yeah,
Less?
he's definitely got less than me. I would think.
80,000.
Wow.
But that's you're not there. You're at the junior level compared to Barry.
All right, no, hold on. Does Flightline run in the Breeders' Cup? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely. Does he run after? Probably not.
Chuck.
Yes, he'll run. And that'll be it.
Does he win?
Absolutely.
Pretty hard to see him not winning.
I mean, he's a freak of a horse, right?
Yep.
I mean, when his gait was longer than Secretariat, I'm like, okay, that means something, right? Chuck, you as the trainer, you understand that, right? I mean, that means something.
I'm skeptical about those kind of things.
All right, well, let me ask you this. This 3-year-old crop is arguably one of the best we've seen in a long time. Yes or no?
When's a long time?
Since American Pharaoh.
That's not that far.
Yeah.
Well, American Pharaoh was what, 2016?
I mean, last year's actually looked promising until the horses all started, croaking. So, I mean, if you look at last year, this time of the year, we were thinking Mandolin and Midnight Bourbon.
Mandolin has nothing to do with it.
The first Derby winner, it looked like a pretty solid group. And then Life is Good, Jackie's Warrior. So last year's was a really strong crop until the spring. And then unfortunately, Midnight Bourbon passed away. And the original Derby winner passed away. Mandaloon lost all his talent. So I mean, this year is a good crop, but I don't think it's that good, really. I mean, the Derby winners.
Really?
We have this conversation all the time. Because every time Rich Strike does something other than run poorly, Barry and I get beat up by certain individuals on social media because we dare to say he just wasn't that good. And we are talking about a horse that has 2 lifetime wins in October of his 3-year-old year. But I mean, early voting is gone. He was terrible his last 2 starts. Taiba looks like a nice horse. It appears that I'm not going to say it wrong this time, Barry. Cyberknife is going to stud. So
Right.
I don't know if he's going to win any more races.
What
Zandon, your boy, he never wins. So the sprinters, I mean, I don't know. I just don't know that it's really that great.
They're okay, I guess. I mean, Charge It got hurt.
Epicenter, of course, I guess I missed him, but he's
He's a man.
He's a very, very good horse.
Yeah, I like him.
Okay, if people don't think that Epicenter is the best 3-year-old horse, I don't know what they're looking at, because I will go all in on that horse. That's how great I think that horse is.
I mean, up to this point of the year, he certainly is shown to be the best 3-year-old.
Right.
Credential wise, he's when you go back and look, he runs first or second every race. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. And there's people that say that maybe he doesn't like to win, but no, he actually wins more than he doesn't.
Who says that? Eddie C? Eddie, I can't see you. Did you disappear?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Are you shrinking?
Stand up.
All right.
Hey, there you go. All right, he's back.
No, I think I pointed this out on our podcast like way back when, and actually Chuck pointed something out even earlier than that, when he lost to Call Me Midnight.
Yes.
And it was really the ride that got him beat, not so much the horse. I mean, Rosario went head and head with a hopeless long shot for the entire race and just got beat a nose. And after that, I was like, wow, that was a really, really, really good performance. I think it was probably one of his best, even though he lost. And from that point on, he's just been getting better.
Well, the thing about Rosario, and I know that everybody that either watches, listens to me, they know that I love Rosario. He's my boy. But Rosario does get a little bit headstrong on a front runner, and sometimes runs him when he shouldn't, in my opinion. But he's my boy.
Well, I mean, in that race, honestly, he didn't really have to get into a speed pool. And
didn't have to at all.
That's the only reason I say that about the ride, because it wasn't technically necessary for him to go head and head with that horse. And he got beat a nose. I mean, really, it wasn't that big, like a huge mistake or anything. But it probably did cost him. But after that, he's ridden him pretty much perfectly. I mean, I know people give him a lot of nonsense for the Preakness, but it really wasn't his fault. I mean, he didn't get a good break, and he kind of had to overcome a few things in early voting, got the jump on him and sealed the deal. But
all right, so Barry, I'm going to say one thing to you. Love the represent the Pirates, I should say. I mean, I'm a total Clemente fan, so love it. Santa Claus, love you coming on board. I'm sorry, I gotta say it that way.
Peace, Eddie.
And Chris, thank you for putting up to me. Peace out to you guys.
Like, it's peace. This is your